Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into it today?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so today we're going to be looking at vitamin A and measles.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a relationship that most people think is pretty simple, but it turns out there's actually a lot more to it than meets the eye. We're going to be using two sources today to unpack all of this.
Okay.
First, we've got an excerpt from a scientific study that was done in Africa.
Okay.
This study really dives deep into the specifics about how supplementing with vitamin A actually affects measles.
I see.
Then we've got a great overview from the Cochrane Library.
Love those guys.
Yeah, the reviews are always super helpful because they pull together all these different studies and give us like the big picture view of what the research is actually saying.
That's great.
So you're kind of getting both sides, the detailed on-the-ground perspective and then that broader lens to see how everything fits together.
Awesome.
Okay, so imagine you're prepping for this meeting on global health initiatives, and you want to talk about vitamin A. And the topic of vitamin A deficiency comes up. You might think, well, that's a problem in developing countries, but not really something we see a lot of in severe cases.
Right.
But get this, in the African study, a full 90% of the children who were hospitalized because of serious complications from measles
Wow.
that also had low levels of vitamin A.
90%. That's pretty surprising. It really makes you think about those assumptions we have about vitamin A deficiency.
It really does.
But when you think about it, it actually makes sense because measles can deplete the body's vitamin A stores even further.
Right, so if a child's already deficient, measles basically just makes it way worse.
Exactly. It's like this vicious cycle. The measles makes the deficiency worse, the deficiency makes the measles hit harder, and it just creates this really dangerous vulnerability to infections and complications.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's where the vitamin A supplementation comes in.
Yeah.
This study looked at how those hospitalized kids responded when they were given vitamin A.
Okay.
And the results were honestly really impressive.
I'd love to hear about them.
Okay, so they used something called a morbidity score. It basically tells you how severe the illness is.
Okay.
And in the group of children who got vitamin A, their morbidity scores went down by 82% by day 8.
82%. That's incredible.
Right. It's a huge improvement.
Huge. Yeah.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just a short-term thing. 6 weeks later, they still had a 61% reduction in their morbidity scores.
Wow.
And get this, 6 months out, they were still seeing an 85% reduction.
That's amazing. So it wasn't just a quick fix. It really had a lasting impact on how these kids recovered from measles.
Exactly. And that's where the Cochrane review comes in. They looked at what happens when you apply this on a bigger scale.
Right. They analyzed tons of studies. So what did they find?
Well, the biggest takeaway was that 2 doses of vitamin A were even more effective than a single dose when it came to reducing mortality.
Especially in kids under 2.
Exactly.
Right.
And that really makes sense when you consider what we were talking about earlier. The more severe the deficiency, the more vitamin A is needed to really make a difference.
That makes sense.
Okay, so 2 doses are better than 1.
Yeah.
But I was curious about something. There was some talk about different types of vitamin A formulations,
Oh, yeah.
like the oil-based versus water-based. Did they find that it mattered which one you used?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it definitely does matter. It really comes down to how well each type is absorbed and used by the body.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, water-based formulations tend to be absorbed a lot better.
Oh, okay.
So that means you get higher levels of vitamin A in the blood.
So does that mean water-based is always the best option then?
Well, not necessarily. Oil-based formulations have some big advantages too.
Like what?
Well, for one, they're usually a lot more stable,
Oh,
which makes them way easier to store and transport.
which is super important in places where resources are limited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they're often more affordable. So it's really about finding that balance.
Right. So it sounds like what works best might actually depend on the specific situation,
Absolutely.
like the region, how bad the measles outbreaks are, what kind of resources they have available.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something you can highlight in your meeting. The key takeaway here is that supplementing with vitamin A in some form is crucial in the fight against measles.
Definitely. Especially in those areas where vitamin A deficiency is common.
This is seriously good info for your meeting. You can now talk about not just how effective vitamin A is, but also all those practical considerations.
Yeah, like choosing the best type of formulation for different situations.
Exactly. And here's another point that I thought was super interesting. You know how a lot of the focus is on developing countries when it comes to vitamin A deficiency.
Right.
Well, the Cochrane review actually included a study from Japan.
Oh, wow. So a high-income country.
Exactly. And even there, they found that giving vitamin A helped reduce how bad the measles symptoms were.
That is interesting. It challenges the assumption that vitamin A deficiency is only a problem in those low-income countries.
Right. So does this mean we should be thinking about vitamin A more broadly?
It's a question worth considering for sure.
Like maybe it has a bigger role to play in routine healthcare.
Yeah, even in developed countries.
This whole vitamin A and measles connection is a lot deeper than I initially thought.
It's one of those things that seems simple at first, but when you dig deeper, you realize just how complex it actually is.
Speaking of digging deeper, the African study also found that the kids who were given vitamin A supplements ended up having shorter hospital stays.
Oh, that's great.
And when you consider that a dose of vitamin A only costs about 2 cents, it really shows you how cost-effective this intervention is.
Absolutely. Shorter hospital stays mean less strain on the healthcare system. It saves money for families, and it's less disruptive for the kids.
It's a win-win situation.
Totally.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key points for our listener who's getting ready for that global health meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
The biggest thing is that 2 doses of vitamin A are super effective in reducing both how severe measles is and the number of deaths from it.
Especially for those kids under 2 years old.
Exactly.
And even just one dose can help. But obviously, 2 doses are better.
For sure. So the bottom line is that vitamin A supplementation should be a core part of any comprehensive strategy to combat measles.
Definitely. Especially where vitamin A deficiency is a common problem.
This deep dive has honestly been super eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder why more people don't know about this and why we aren't doing more about it.
Yeah, there's often a gap between what the scientific evidence says and what actually happens in healthcare.
That's true.
Raising awareness and pushing for policies that are based on evidence is super important.
I agree. If we want to close that gap, we need to be talking about this more.
For sure.
It's like we've stumbled on this secret weapon against measles, and now we need to tell everyone about it.
Exactly. Knowledge is most powerful when it's shared and actually used to improve lives.
Couldn't agree more. So to our listener who's prepping for that meeting, we hope this has given you a really strong foundation.
Yeah.
So you can talk about the science, the practical stuff, and even spark some bigger conversations about vitamin A in different contexts.
I think they're ready.
As you're getting ready for this meeting, I want you to think about the bigger picture here.
Okay.
We've been talking about measles,
Right.
but could there be other diseases or health challenges where vitamin A is more important than we realize?
That's a really interesting question. It really makes you think about how interconnected everything is. Nutrition, disease, socioeconomic factors, they all play a role.
It's amazing how something as simple as vitamin A can have such a big impact on global health.
It really is.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah,
But you're going into that meeting with some seriously good information.
I think so.
You can talk about the science, the practical considerations, and even start some bigger conversations about vitamin A in all these different contexts.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe this will lead to some new breakthrough in global health.
That's what I love about these deep dives. There's always something new to discover.
For sure.
And that spark of curiosity can lead to some pretty amazing places. So thanks for joining us today for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.